Welcome to the show. This is Brandon Wen, and you're listening to the Understanding Consumer Neuroscience podcast, brought to you by the folks at Cloud Army. In this episode, Richard talks to Phil White, co-founder of Grounded World, about his work with brands trying to become more sustainable with customers and how neuroscience helps point the way with effective strategies.
Hi, this is Richard Campbell. Thanks for listening to Understanding Consumer Neuroscience. And my guest today is Phil White, who is the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Grounded World, which is a multi-award-winning B Corp certified social innovation and brand activation agency. That's a heck of a title and name, too. Phil, thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So what do you do at Grounded World? You're working with brands and companies trying to do right things?
I mean, that's a much cleaner way of saying it, isn't it? Much less of a mouthful. Yeah, we say we do kind of three things well, which is just as well, because that's what our agency is built on. Right. Our agency is built on. But we say we articulate purpose, activate brands, and accelerate impact. So articulating purpose is, as you would expect, it's helping companies or brands define their raison d'etre, their reason to exist.
Yeah. Thinking beyond make money into what is it we really do here? Like, why are we here?
Exactly. All the nice existential stuff, and then pull that down into a brand positioning or a go-to-market strategy, or sometimes even just operationally in terms of how that's going to influence their product, their supply chain, their innovation pipeline, their culture sometimes as well. So that's the articulate bit, the kind of all the strategery, as my co-founder would say, and then the activate bit is how we translate that really into kind of branding and marketing communications. So branding, identity.
Yeah, ultimately, how do you communicate that to others? Now that we know who we are and what we care about, how do I tell anybody about that?
Exactly. And ultimately what sits behind that, and I guess which is why we're ultimately going to be chatting, is, how do you change behavior? Right. It's enough to influence intention. And, we often hear that people want to do the right thing, but they rarely do the right things. And that's often kind of where we tend to focus, particularly when it comes to consumer behavior change and just trying to figure out what you do.
Well, come on, Phil. Doing the right thing is hard.
It really is. Well, it isn't, though, is it?
It shouldn't be, honestly. Like, it shouldn't be.
We make it hard.
We do.
Because we obfuscate it, right? And kind of post-rationalize and justify kind of actions outside of when we feel that we haven't got any influence or control. But really, it kind of comes down to doing the right thing is actually really straightforward. We all feel it.
Yeah. Well, and we quickly say yes to it too. It's like, are you going to pick the non-impactful packaging? Absolutely. Till you actually are standing at the shelf. Right. Like
exactly.
There's that what you said versus what you did moment. And it's really interesting when those two don't line up. I mean, arguably, we talk about neuroscience as like trying to understand why people's words don't always match their actions. Right. So maybe we can get those things to line up.
Right. It's funny. We've been chatting to Matthew McCarthy just recently, actually. He's the ex-CEO of Ben & Jerry's. Who's kind of moving now into kind of more, I guess, sort of leadership coaching, and you could almost argue CEO activism. But he was kind of talking about some of his experiences at, Unilever and Ben & Jerry's and, trying to, on Hellman's is how to kind of make sure that, the eggs that go into Hellman's are free range and not, kind of not battery farm. And it was like, well, it's the right thing to do. So we're going to do it. We've just got to figure out how we can afford it. We've just got to figure out how, but because it's the right thing to do, it's a simple decision. Now we've got to figure out how we do it, not the other way around.
Yeah.
I think that's the trap that a lot of companies fall into. They try and justify it the other way around. So sustainability is always going to be a cost. It's always going to be about mitigating risk or trying to mitigate cost. When in fact, it's actually, if it's the right thing to do, then the business model should flex around it rather than.
Well, and all change is hard, right? Like that's not avoidable. If you're going to change the supplier of chickens, that's a difficult thing, whether they're a more sustainable chicken farmer or not. It's just a difficult thing. The idea that you're going to go through change, you're going to commit to that effort anyway. So now our values come into play. It's like we're going to shape this decision around we're going to do better on that.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's any more hard. Like I don't think that's additional difficulty. You've limited the selection criteria. One would argue that makes your life easier. Anytime we can scope it down. But excusing, I'm not going to do this because change is hard, because change is always hard no matter what. It doesn't seem to make any sense.
It's interesting. You've got this, no, I agree. And, there's this inherent tension between courage from a leadership and an organizational point of view and convenience from a consumer point of view.
Right.
And these are direct forces, opposing forces that are directly working against each other all of the time in terms of driving momentum or enabling us to kind of, create a more equitable or regenerative economy or helping people kind of buy more responsibly, because convenience is a nasty bugger, isn't it? It really is.
Well, let's face it. Most people aren't carefully reading the label on the mayonnaise to make sure they were free range chickens.
Right.
So why are you incurring that expense? Because without a doubt, those chickens cost more. Those eggs cost more. If the customer isn't even looking.
Right. Exactly.
Do we make the customer look? Is that the thing to do?
Honestly, I think it's more about making sure that you support your brand equity from a functional benefit and an emotional benefit point of view, and you make sure that your sustainability claim or commitment supports the inherent point of difference or the value in your brand. If you can actually, if you can connect your desire to be more sustainable, do the right thing with a functional or emotional aspect of your brand, which is what differentiates you and actually what drives people to purchase you in the first place, then that's the holy grail. It's when those two things become disconnected,
right?
Where, everyone smells a rat and greenwashing kind of comes along and it just feels very inauthentic and then it becomes a weight. Then it becomes a cost.
Yeah. Now you're doing harm to the brand.
Right. Or when you're doing harm to the organization and everyone doesn't get behind it because intuitively they're being told they have to do it from on high, but they know intuitively that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And therefore that's where the kind of disconnect occurs at that kind of mid-management everyday brand level, because you can't justify it because the people running the brand know that it doesn't make any sense.
That's not what's happening. So, and that leads to an interesting question. It's like, okay, I've done the right thing here. I'm probably going to charge more for my mayonnaise, because I'm, have to make that work. Do I make a marketing campaign around it? Like, should I really campaign about the fact that we're doing the right thing? Or do you just do it and hope that's okay? Like, it seems like you want to do the marketing piece.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just this morning actually on LinkedIn. One of my kind of community, I would say, was posting. She was just about to give a keynote speech, and she just posted a little video. So that, this is what I'm going to talk about. And she talked about really the way she framed marketing, which I thought was kind of interesting. Is marketing is a service. Marketing's role, particularly in this kind of new world, is not to try and convince you to buy something. It's to try and help you make a better decision.
Right.
And actually, if you I know it's a simple reframe, but it's a very powerful reframe, actually, if you kind of think about it. And whereby then, marketing and what you say and what you do it has to have utility. It's utilitarian, because ultimately what you're trying to do is do the best thing for the greatest number of people to have the biggest impact, rather than trying to bash someone over the head with something that you want to sell them, which they may or may not deem as relevant. So and if you think about it in that sense, it does change a little bit. So, well, not a little bit, a lot.
Yes, this is not trumpeting we're good guys. This is about, hey, we think about mayonnaise way more than you do. So let me summarize the things that you should care about when selecting a mayonnaise.
Well, taking on mayonnaise, and the mayonnaise is the mayonnaise, but then it's about, as I'm sure you and your listeners know, it's really more about their kind of social play is really all around food waste and kind of making use of more leftovers, and how mayonnaise is the magic that makes your leftovers great again.
Yeah, that's a great approach.
Which is a really fantastic positioning if you think about it, because connects the reason why your brand exists, what mayonnaise is often used to do, and ties it to something which has really great social value and impact. So I think that's why the brand is, continues to be relevant and continues to be successful, because it's figured out how to connect to the why it exists to the way of profit.
Yeah.
Right. And actually deliver something of value as well as, making a difference in the world. So I think that's really cool.
No, it's fascinating. And exactly that point of addressing that broader issue, plugging into the fact that people want to do better. And so we can surface those things. I was only thinking about the packaging and the product within. You're thinking about how it's utilized and how I become a part of my customer's overall goal to reduce impact. Right.
Because brands, the whole point of a brand is it has some level of utility that conveys meaning, that adds value to your life. And I think for many, many years, we I guess it depends on the brand and how successful and, competent their marketing team are, but it's very easy, isn't it, to kind of get straitjacketed into more functional, tactical, commodified, competitive frame where you're really just kind of trying to reinforce your core proposition without really thinking more broadly about the bigger picture and how that brand can play a bigger role, more transformative role in culture or society. And the move towards a circular or regenerative economy is that it forces you to think more systemically. You can't think in isolation,
right?
Because you will die.
Yeah. But at the same time, most people are already busy. This is another thing they've only got so much cycles for. So we have an opportunity then to make it easier to say, this is part of your broader strategy, however formed, to reduce your impact on the planet. Yeah.
Right. It's the love that you have for a brand or a product or a service, that never switches to hate. It's not like love and hate are actually a polarity. It's love and indifference.
Oh yeah, no, that's the far scarier
And then
thing.
As soon as the people are indifferent, then you become irrelevant.
Yeah.
And then when you're irrelevant, then you're really in trouble.
Yeah.
So in this ever kind of very complex sea change of political, social, economic kind of, I don't know what's going on at the moment. It's like the tectonic plates of culture are colliding, aren't they, in so many places around the world. And unless you've got your eye on that bigger picture and you're thinking about how you frame the utility and the value of who you are and what you do, you're just going to get swept away. You're going to get sunk, or you're just going to become irrelevant.
Right. Now I think we're very much in a social cycle where we have been reminded of the differences in each other. And while they're still not large, they exist. And so there's an exertion in general to clarify, your positions. People are more mindful of it than they have been in a long time. I think for a long time, and I'll lay some of this at the feet of the pandemic, we just presumed we were all on the same page. And we got reminded that there's a few other pages here. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it means people are forced to think about it more and to express it more. And that is going to invariably lead to a certain amount of friction.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I do wonder whether, because everything is political at the moment, isn't it? Really, let's face it. You can't really steer out of it or away from it. It underpins everything.
Well, it's become advantageous to make it present that way, whether it is or not.
Yeah, correct. It's presented that way. But the kind of perpetuation of the narrative of falsehood, if you like, and how even facts or truths now don't even seem to hold up in their own right as being factually correct. There's always someone that will dispute it or just keep saying the same thing until, unfortunately, people believe it to be the case, not mentioning any names. It's nice, isn't it, to kind of know that the bigger opportunity and where the emphasis and the real focus for kind of brands and business now is the need for scientific validation and verification and support.
Sure.
You do. Because what that does, that just brings a new level of transparency, I think, and a new level of rigor and a new level of validation. And I don't think you can do marketing has always existed on being very flexible with the truth. Let's face it.
Yeah.
You might get essentially to the truth of the product and what it does, but how you frame it and how you couch it and how you make it relevant is always been a little bit open to interpretation, which is one of the nice things about being creative.
Yeah. Within limits, like you can't lie about your product. Like there are rules, but But certainly we can get there are, I'm always very conscious of, there are regulated words and there are unregulated words. And when you go along, there's, no regulation around the word natural. It doesn't mean anything from a legal concept. So people use it a lot, right?
Exactly. So the reason I mentioned that is going back, that kind of brings us to that original point about marketing as a service, proving out utility, because unless you can prove out your utility and there's a reason you exist, which adds value and meaning in a genuine, authentic, verifiable way,
right,
marketing's gonna have a problem, because it's just not gonna fly anymore.
Sure. And so, this is where the neuroscience equation comes into play, because it gives us a set of measures.
Right.
And you've worked with Cloud Army before. What kind of tests were you interested in? Because there's a lot of different kinds of neuroscience. We've talked about a ton. Yeah.
So one of the things we spend a lot of time on ourselves as really a kind of innovation and behavior change agency, I guess you could say, is understanding the intention action gap.
Right.
Understanding why people say they're going to do something and then why they don't do it.
Right.
And part of that is just a research methodology piece, which we all know, but actually understanding where that intention action gap occurs in a life cycle or in a customer journey or within a consumption occasion, let's say, or within a shopping mission, and then being able to identify what it is, where it is, why it exists, and how big the lost opportunity is associated with not addressing that intention action gap is often the thing that we find most compelling. And, as brands and retailers need to work more closely together around their ESG commitments and figure out how to kind of solve it together, then it becomes even more important to understand what the commercial value or the size of the prize is around addressing that intention action gap, because that's the thing that's going to drive the behavior change that's going to deliver the profit.
Well, again, that this idea of marketing as a service is like, hey, I'm going to help you with this gap, or I'm never going to say it that way. It's like, but it's also, hey, you mean to be more sustainable. Let me show you how our product helps you to achieve the goal you've put out for yourself.
Right. Exactly. And, kind of thinking back to retail and just the influence, the impact that contextual and environmental cues have on people's behavior, which we all know. There's even just some even basic stuff that can be done just to kind of make the chances of someone picking up brand X instead of brand Y more likely, can often just come down to the context of the environment, let alone what it is you're trying to say or how you're trying to position the brand. Right. So for me, I love it, because going back to that point about systemic, you've got to think more systemically now about everything. You've got to understand how something fits within a broader context, rather than just in the isolation of a given channel or a given moment in time. And that's the stimulating thing for me. That's why I think, that's why I love what I do, to be perfectly honest with you.
And getting out there in actually watching, can we change behavior in a positive way ultimately?
Right.
I don't know that we're going to change the world with mayonnaise per se, but, I grab onto a metaphor that will help people sort of put it into place to say, is this the thing that makes a difference? What I like about the particular one is like, this isn't going to change the world per se, but it is a step and make better. It's also not the most important purchase people make in the given day, but most products aren't. Most of us that are marketing things is like, no, this isn't a defining purchase. You're only going to get that little iota of attention to make that momentary decision. How do you present those messages in a way that with that iota, it's enough to persuade that the feature set of the product gets them to a place that they wanted to go?
Yeah. It's funny. I was chatting to an associate a couple of weeks ago who's been working on this theory, I guess you could say, which makes a lot of sense, but it's the notion that, we shouldn't talk about consumption. We should talk about consummation.
Interesting.
And at first level, you go, what? What's he talking about? But actually, when you unpack it, it makes a whole lot of sense, because if you rethink the role of a product and the act of consumption, not as an end in itself, but as part of
a step in a cycle.
Exactly. Exactly. Step in the cycle. And it's a part that makes that product whole as a step in the journey to its ultimate destination. Then that kind of, again, it just kind of reframes everything, doesn't it?
Sure. The problem with the word consummation is because you've only ever used it in the context of a marriage, and that makes it weird. Although in that context, it is a large cycle, right? And so a consummation of a consummation with product is from that need, desire to acquisition, consumption, and completion, and wherever it ends up before the need, desire kicks back in again. Like it is a loop.
Right. And the other thing I just love about that, intrinsically kind of knowing where, some of the barriers to why people say they don't want to behave more responsibly or sustainably is that, you often hear, well, I don't know if I'm having an impact. I can't track my impact. I can't see the impact. But if if the brand and the utility is inherently connected to something that has social impact or transformative value, and you're connected with that, and you see your role in helping that brand or product realize its ultimate purpose, then by definition, you're overcoming that barrier, aren't you? Because just by consummating that brand or whatever it is, you're actually a player and a protagonist in it, rather than just a passive, recipient of someone's engineered value proposition in a boardroom somewhere. So that's why I think it's also a really powerful concept, actually.
Yeah. And interesting to test for that, to say, are they getting it? To do the kind of testing to say, when I present it this way, does it tie in with that value? You have that response.
Yeah.
Because
for sure,
so many industries I've worked in, always the line has been, we are not our customer. We care more about our product than our customer does. We have spent more time, we utilize it differently than they would. Maybe not talking about mayonnaise, but it's always that same problem. And so going to these measurable methods. So it's like, this message resonates with us, but does it resonate with the potential customer, with the demographic that we care about? Because we are not them, and they're going to think about these things differently. And so the testing becomes an essential part of, okay, we have targeted a market successfully. We can move the needle on that. Now I can focus my marketing on that area. Right.
And that's kind of why I like, Cloud Army's approach to this through kind of implicit association testing, because that really does act as in the absence of very deep ethnographic or qualitative research, and often the commercial need to be able to kind of turn this around at relative speed and, relatively effectively.
Yeah.
I just love the way how, the implicit association, i.e. the speed at which you kind of select swipe left or swipe right to select a specific product attribute or a barrier or a driver, really does actually give you some insight into purchase intent, because, it is a bit of a proxy, isn't it, for behavior?
Sure.
Unconsciously, what are you more motivated to choose? What are you more propelled towards without giving it too much thought, which to your point is the majority of the mindset in which our daily decisions are made? Then, it's not a bad proxy for purchase intent, is it?
No, not at all.
Actually.
And it occurs to me in the work I've done with implicit testing too, it also can help you define, one of the things I appreciated about Cloud Army was the recruiting mechanism. That when I wasn't sure what the demographic was, I could, let's do a few different demographic sets in the recruiting mechanism with the same set of implicit tests, and could see, this resonated more with this group than it resonated with that group. So it could actually help me shape the areas that I'm going to target for the marketing spend based on how the implicit test went.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. We've done a couple of studies with them now. And what's just kind of been interesting is, I think in both cases, actually, there wasn't any real significant difference actually across demographic groups. And I guess if you think about that, it kind of makes a bit of sense, doesn't it? Because if you're looking at more subconscious kind of automatic, I guess, system 2 driven propensities, then we're all wired that way, right? We're all wired that way. There's not, if you've hit the nail on the head in terms of fundamentally, what are those utilitarian, functionally and emotionally driven benefits to make that brand of value? And that's not really going to change for anyone.
Yeah. I wonder about that, because of course there's a common sense angle, or sort of a gestalt that says, hey, it's the young people that are more concerned about sustainability than the older folks. But if that's not showing up when you do the tests, it kind of flies in the face of that. Because at the same time, I think we're largely exposed to a lot of the same media and a lot of the same messaging. Like you can't argue with the amount of messaging going on throughout the world around these topics that maybe it has sunk in for most folks, regardless of demographic.
Right.
And at the same time, some messages just have more power, right? And I think it would be pretty exciting to be able to test that way and say, hey, it doesn't matter who we put this set of messages in front of. It has an influence. It helps them to act towards their values. That would be a huge win for me as a marketer to know, yeah, I can put this into any market. It's going to do well.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know that it's true, but you certainly want to test for it. But boy, I'd love it to find that. I think it's a good day when you can get a set of tests that says clearly for this group of people who are customers that we want, we get results. Like that's a win. But to get a result that said, oh no, this span demographic groups. You can place this anywhere and you'll be fine. Like I think I'd be dancing in the streets.
Oh, well, I would agree. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, these are challenging jobs in challenging times. And I think earlier we were talking about the challenges that are going on in society right now. It's like, hey, anytime I can show that we're more alike, that's a good day. Because I think we are mostly alike.
I agree. Even though when you look around, it doesn't feel that way at the moment.
No, it's easy to get that small difference is being amplified so much. I mean, it's kind of a great goal for us as marketers to say, hey, could we make a purely inclusive campaign? No us versus them. We are all us.
I remember we were doing that reminds me of we did some work with the UN a couple of years ago, actually. It's just before COVID, unfortunately, which means that the kind of brakes put on it and it never really saw the light of day, which is a bit of a shame because it's probably more needed now than ever. But the challenge that we were trying to tackle was breaking hate.
Yeah.
How do you break hate? And, what sits underneath it and why is there such polarity and division? And we were working with a very small non-profit associated with the UN. I think it was called We Are Your Protector. And the fundamental notion is that the greatest stories and evidence of hate being systematically dismantled is when one person from one side has actually demonstrated humanity to go and save someone from another side.
Right.
So, imagine, I don't know, a no man's land running through the camp of two opposing forces and one human seeing someone struggling or one human, seeing someone in pain or anguish and actually just kind of reaching out and just displaying a basic humanity. Yeah. There's nothing stronger than that power of dismissing your narrative and actually just acting on a basic, simply human way. And it was really interesting. We had a jazz musician that had managed to befriend the chief wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. Wow. He was a black jazz musician, by the way, and then ended up to the point where he walked his daughter up the aisle for him to get married, which is, if you think about that in terms of that context, it's a crazy thing. We had a self-proclaimed terrorist who explained how he had basically shifted his perspective as a result of kind of seeing pain and being more instrumental in actually helping people from the other side. We had some very interesting people with some very extreme, a neo-Nazi.
Wow.
Yeah, white supremacist neo-Nazi. And they all had some very, very interesting, very personal, very visceral stories about what they had done. But the way they came out of it, in every single case, was a realization of the fundamental power of humanity. And there's nothing more enlightening and rewarding than actually helping someone from the side that you're supposed to hate, or that's the side you're supposed to be opposed to, and creating a bridge between them. So I thought that was just an interesting learning that I think you can apply to lots of different things.
You have those two parts of, first was the moment within their head to connect with humanity and to do the right thing. And then there's the impact that it had around everyone, both the person they saved and the moment of just saying, the two enemies came to, came together, or at least one side did, and effectively served the other.
Right.
We'd all be better off for more of that.
Well, to your point, it's a good metaphor for the intention-action gap, then, isn't it? Really,
it is.
If you think about it.
It's much the same thing, but in a positive way. I'm supposed to hate that person, but then I save them.
We are what we do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
basically.
Ultimately, that's the truth.
So I think that's what it boils down to.
Phil, This was a very fun conversation, sir. Thanks so much for spending the time with us. It's great to see, applying these technologies, obviously in a challenging area, where we're trying to do right more often. And, let's face it, some of our digressions are pretty interesting too, because it is a bigger picture item here for us to understand more about how people really work and how these technologies are helping us to do better for it. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk to you next time on Understanding Consumer Neuroscience.